In this video, I'm going to show you how we can configure EIGRP between the PE and C. You know that we can configure EIGRP in named mode or numbered mode. The numbered mode of configuration of the EIGRP is the traditional mode of configuration, and the named mode is the newest method of configuring EIGRP. In this video, I am going to show you how you can configure EIGRP in both numbered mode and also named mode between the PE and C. In the first scenario of the EIGRP, I used the same scenario that I configured in the previous video. You know that we used this scenario in previous video, and in that videos I used the for example RIP, routing information protocol between the PE and C, but now I'm going to show you how we can configure EIGRP between the PE and C. Don't forget, in this scenario, again, I'm using the ISIS as the IGP in the service provider, and also the IP addressing exactly are same with the IP addressing in the previous scenario. Because of that, we can only review the configuration of the other things related to IP addressing, enabling the interfaces, IGP enabling on the service provider, and BGP neighborship between the Ps. And finally, we have one new part, the EIGRP configuration. Let me to start the configuration with the notepad file. This is the notepad file of the previous video. We need to change some values in this notepad file, and after that we can copy that configuration on the CLIs. All routers now don't have any configuration in these routers. Now we are using the empty configuration. Starting from the router 1. In router 1, you know that first we need to configure the service provider. Because of that, here we have ETH00 and also loopback 0. ETH00's IP address is 10.121, this interface, and then ISIS network point to point. Because we are using ISIS in these networks, in the service provider, I used ISIS network point to point, then no shutdown. Also, we have one loopback interface, 192.168.2541/32. You know that we need to configuring the loopback interfaces only on the routers that we need to configure them with BGP, because in R2 and R3 we don't configuring the BGP, we don't need loopback interface. After that, I enabled ISIS. In this scenario, in the service provider, I used only one level, the level 2 only of ISIS, because here we don't have other areas. For example, level 1 areas, I used only level 2 routers. And then the net address configured, such as the previous scenario, IS type is level 2 only, log adjacency change all, and then I enabled passive interface loopback 0, means loopback 0 is the passive interface of the R1, and then IP router ISIS and the ETH00 of router 1. Don't forget that, as I mentioned in the previous video, if you need to review the concept of ISIS, you can use the ISIS video. Here, I expect that you learn ISIS before then this course. Let me to copy the configuration of R1. Everything until now is same. Because of that, we can copy the configuration of R1 and pasting it on the router 1. In the router 2, also, we don't have any change with the previous video. We have two interfaces, ETH00 and ETH01 with IP addressing, and I also enabled the ISIS. Because of that, let me to copy the router 2's configuration. You learned the configuration. I talked about this configuration in the previous video. This is the R2's configuration. And after that, also in router 3, we don't have any change about the IP addressing and configuring ISIS. Let me to copy this configuration on the router 3 CLI. And after that, we have router 4. This is the router 4. Again, in router 4, for IP addressing and enabling ISIS, we don't have any change. Let me to copy this configuration from the router 4 and pasting on the R4 CLI. That's it. This is the first part of configuration. IP addressing, then enabling the interfaces, and after that, enabling IGP inside the service provider. This is the first step of the MPLS Layer 3 VPN configuration. Don't forget that in most cases, you don't need to configure, for example, IP addressing or IGP inside the service provider when you are working in the real environment, because somebody or a teams before configured these features, and you need only to configure PEs for connecting to customers. Okay, but if you are designing and you are implementing service provider from the scratch, you need to configure these features, or maybe in the, for example, interviews, or in the exams, or in the for example your laboratories, you need to configure service provider. But in most cases, the service provider before configured, and you don't need to configure inside of the service provider. Okay, let me to go to the next step, configuring BGP. You know that we need to configuring BGP or iBGP neighborship between router 1 and router 4, because these two routers are PE routers. Again, the configuration exactly same, but let me to review. In router 1, I use router BGP 65000. No BGP default IPv4 unicast is the command that we can use it for disabling the IPv4 advertisement, because you know that here we need only to advertise the VPN v4 between the router 1 and router 4. The neighbor is 192.168.2544. You can check the connectivity between R1 and R4 with the ping 192.168.2544 source loopback 0, because we enabled IGP in this service provider. Now we have connectivity. If you want, you can check the routing table of the R1. You will find the loopback IP address of the router 4. And then let me to copy this configuration. Don't forget, address family VPN v4 now is activated for these neighbors. Also, you know that by default we have a comment here, neighbor 192.168.2544, extend community extended send, then a community extended. Why? You know that we need to advertising or sending community, extended community between the router 1 and router 4, because RT or route target is a extended community. But because the for example a VPN v4, when you are enabling VPN v4 for a neighbor, this means that we need to advertise RT. This command automatically added to the configuration, and you don't need to configure it. But let me to show you again. I showed you in the previous video, but here I'm going to show you again. Conf T, then this is the configuration. Look at here, do show run section router BGP can show us that this command now is available. Neighbor 192.168.2544 send community extended. Also, we need to configure the BGP in the router 4, the next router. Now we have connectivity. You know that in MPLS VPN, we don't enable the BGP on the core routers. We need to enable BGP only on the PE routers. But in some cases, when we are using route reflector, maybe in one or two route reflector, in the core routers, we can configure the route reflector or the BGP. Okay, look at here. Now we have neighborship between router 1 and router 4. This is the BGP neighborship. The next things that we need to configure is enabling MPLS for forwarding the data, as I mentioned before. Because I used ISIS, we can use MPLS LDP autoconfig to configuring LDP or enabling LDP on the all interfaces that ISIS is enabled on them. And also, if you want, you can use MPLS IP. Let me to use the simplest form, the R1 with the router ISIS, MPLS LDP autoconfig, also in router 2, also in router 3, and finally router 4. You need to check or verify everything before going to next step. For example, in R1 here, you can see that we have neighborship with LDP neighborship. But if you want, you can check it with the do show MPLS LDP neighbor. Look at here. We have neighborship with the router 2. You know that I talked about all of these details in the MPLS LDP course, and you need to learn these features before, for example, understanding the MPLS VPN. And then after that, in router 2, again, we can check the neighborship, do show MPLS For example, LDP neighbor. Yes, we have two neighbor.